here's the crazy thing. So people ask me all the time, they're like, what do you do, right? And it's that first question that most people are asking when you're an adult, quite frankly. And, I tell them I'm a writer, and they always ask, well, what kind of writing do you do? Have I read anything you wrote? And I say, well, mostly books. And sometimes they look at me like I'm an idiot because they think I'm being facetious with them, or they think I'm being like, kind of cute or witty or something. And I'm like, no, I'm saying that because there are so many different kinds of writing. So today and all summer long, I'm going to be with you guys with writers who do things other than books, because there is a career out there to be had for writers. And so I'm with Kimberly. I'm going to let her introduce herself and talk to us about, first of all, what kind of writing is it that you do?
Okay, well, I'm Kimberly. That's me. I am a theater critic, and I publish through an independent blog.
Well, how did you get into being a theater critic?
I've always been involved in theater, making theater, directing, acting, stage managing, whatever. And so the idea of getting to see theater for free, quite frankly, was very appealing to me. And so I sought out this internship in Madison under Lindsay Christians, who's a writer at the Capital Times there. And so I got to start seeing some shows and really seek some mentorship through that. And I eventually just took it down back to Milwaukee here and kept on writing on my own time.
Okay, so you're primarily in the Milwaukee area. Do you just go in the city of Milwaukee?
Yeah, it's the greater Milwaukee area. So I do a lot that's west of there as well.
Mm-hmm. What would you say makes a good theater review?
Well, okay. You don't want to over-summarize and just tell us what happened. I mean, it's the age-old show us, don't tell us. But that's actually in application here and everywhere, honestly. It's the basics. But so you want to really describe what happened, and then through your description, the reader should be able to infer whether it was positive or negative, as opposed to just saying, this was a bad show, and here's why.
Okay, so what are some of the things when you're not telling a synopsis, so you're not synopsizing it, what are some of the different things that, as a reviewer, when you come to see a show, that you're looking for, that you think you might highlight?
Yeah, so the first instinct for anybody seeing a show is to go, I like that actor, and I like that character, and that piece of the story. But then going beyond that, really looking at the production value of the show, looking at the different designers who went into it, the lighting, the set, the direction, and what choices that they made that make this performance different than any other performance that could have picked up the same script, and why this script. Really looking.
You're using that term production value. What do you mean by production value?
It's really looking beyond what you immediately see when you're taking in the show and into all of the work that goes on backstage, and not necessarily like, oh, did they make their set change in time? Did everything come on right? But more looking at, like I said, the design and those elements that add to the show without strictly being designated in the title.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that maybe you see out there from new or still learning, or quite frankly, old-fashioned, and, doing it an old way, things that are negative in the review industry?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that's contributing to negative reviews is because of the deterioration of traditional media, we have a lot less quality control in this area, and so people are seeing shows and just putting their initial thoughts out there, which is genuine and that's valid, but as opposed to really considering the piece and what was its purpose and did it or did it not fulfill its purpose, it's a lot more, here's what happens. So it's more, journalistic in that way. I know that this is journalism in the broad sense, but it's reporting on what happened rather than looking into the piece itself and whether it artistically served its purpose.
So when you talk about serving a purpose, I noticed, I've looked through your blog. It's thestageonapage.com for those of you who end up becoming a fan after this conversation. I've looked through it, and you talk about a purpose, and I noticed that you review both professional theater as well as touring theater, as well as, well, the local community show
Right.
houses, right? So in your mind, when you're reviewing something, do you delineate, hey, this is Broadway, or hey, this is, and what, how is that reflected in your writing?
To an extent, yes. So a lot of that would be looking at the show and what caliber you should be expecting from them. Needless to say, I hold Broadway shows at a much higher expectation than I would hold your local community theater. And so through that, it's not, I mean, not to be biased to different groups, but it's not that everything is held to the exact same standard. Rather, you want to see, does it serve its community? And so once you get to that broad professional level, they have a lot more community to serve, and they have a lot of a larger goal going on there, as opposed to on those smaller community levels. To serve their purpose, they may not need as much. You may not need a perfect cast or a perfect set, as opposed to those things which would stand out on a large stage.
Mm-hmm. What have been some of your best experiences as a theater critic?
One of my favorite things is when I see a small company or a low budget company, and I don't mean that in an insulting way, but just compared to large professional budgets, when you see them do something that's really incredible and having the platform to really help push that and try to get other people to see that same piece, you really feel more responsibility, or I feel more responsibility in that role, and I find a lot of joy in it, knowing that those are the groups that really benefit from this sort of thing.
Your reviews kind of become a marketing piece.
Oh, absolutely.
So do
100%.
you have, do the groups, they use quotes like when they show like before movies?
So different groups do different things. A lot of groups will take some of their production photos, stills from the show, and take highlighted quotes, favorite moments from the review, and put them over that to share out. When you're publishing a review, you have to be ready to be 100% quotable on everything you say.
Okay, so that speaks really to that writing and to some of that professionalism in the structure and the quality of your work. So talk to me specifically about the writing. What are some of the things that, some of your process, some of the checks that you do on yourself, some of like that structure that you're looking to include in your reviews?
Right. Because this area has turned to a lot of independent bloggers and independent publishers, there are a lot of different stylistic markers that have come out through this. So in trying to achieve that quotability, I like to remove myself entirely from my writing, which leaves me with a very formal and very active voice. Those are my main things that I'm always watching for. So never dropping in any yous, I's, opinions, but rather using descriptive language to hint at my opinions, and then really sticking to active voice.
Okay.
There are other bloggers who are just as valid in putting themselves in it and saying, I loved this show because, and they raise a lot of really valid points, but it makes your content a little hard to be marketed with, because when they're quoting you, when the theaters are quoting you for marketing materials, it's not practical.
It's not broad for everybody to read.
Exactly.
So there are a lot of reviewers out there. It's just like with books. You ask, who's an author. You go to any networking meeting today, and it's like, oh, everybody is a this and an author, blank and an author. So there's the same with reviewers. There's, I wouldn't say it's quite reached that level that book writing has, but there are a lot of reviewers. Have you ever struggled to find work? Let's start with that one. Have you ever struggled to find work with the number of reviewers there are in the area?
No, but not because I didn't work for it. I think that if you want the work, you go and get the work. And so a lot of, especially when I was first getting started with my blog, a lot of the work I got was from directly reaching out to theaters and offering my services, rather than waiting for them to come to me. And then once the momentum kicks up, the work starts flowing in a lot more.
How many shows do you review in, say, a month on average?
So let's see, there are 4 weeks to a month. Probably around 8, I would say.
Okay.
I see around 2 a weekend.
All right. That's really active.
Yeah.
So have you ever struggled with, this is the number one fear all writers experience. Have you ever had the fear of plagiarism or actually experienced plagiarism?
But I definitely fear accidental plagiarism. It started out when I was first starting, I would read the work of my mentor before writing reviews, and it would constantly roll through my head if I was going to accidentally use any of her words or take any of her ideas. And so I've made a rule for myself. I don't read any other reviews until I've written my own. And I talk it out with other people. I discuss the show. I want to hear other opinions because I'm not an island, you know. But I really work on not seeing any other critics' work before I write my own. As for experiencing plagiarism, I have experienced that. I think that that's a reality of not only writing, but specifically writing online where there aren't a lot of, like I said, there's not a lot of quality control. There aren't any checks and balances. You know, we're just all people entirely in control of our own blogs and our own websites and how we publish.
How did it make you feel? What did you do? Did it put any fears in your way of putting stuff out there again?
Yeah, so it wasn't a good feeling. You know, I want to have control over my own work, and I was hurt. I was hurt that somebody would think that I wouldn't notice, you know? Like, I'm aware of my own words, but I read what other critics have to say. And so I think that there's this habit we get into as writers when you're doing your own work and you're in your laptop screen and it's just you, that you aren't connecting with the world. But especially in online publishing mediums, we're all reading each other's stuff. We all know what everyone has to say about it. And so that kind of offended me a little bit. But then where to move forward, I just continued doing what I do. I have faith in my own writing, and I feel strong with my own base that I've built. And so when I weighed the options of what it was worth to fight this battle and perhaps cause any tensions or problems, not specifically with this person, but even more so with the theater community that reaches out to this other critic, weighing that against these relationships with which I've built and these theaters which trust me, I chose the relationships with the theaters.
So you just let it lie.
I let it lie. Sometimes you just gotta let it go.
I understand that, and I can say most writers understand that. And if you're a writer who's worked with me in the past, I've told them all, you will never get work, you will never get discovered, you will never get your stuff out there if you allow that fear to cripple you from putting it out there. So it's true, you might experience a negative situation, but that situation is far less than most people think it happens. You know, ideas, nothing you can write new that God and Shakespeare haven't already covered. So, you know, ideas are not unique. It's what you do with them, and you have to trust that your voice is what's going to bring the best to it. So you cannot be afraid. I'm glad to hear that you weren't afraid to keep putting it out there. And I think when people do it, especially intentionally, I do think there's some of that learning when you're a student or an intern where they take some on. I think when people do it intentionally, they know. And then they've got to have some fear in them.
Right. I mean, and something I found really comforting, if there are any comforts in this process, is I, of course, spent time poring over my work and this work that I recognized my work in, and realizing that the voices were still entirely different. You cannot hide if you are, unless you're literally copying and pasting, which that's not a form of plagiarism I've typically seen. That's bold. But if you are taking somebody else's work, it is the mark of a much greater writer to be able to hide your own voice, and it is not a much greater writer who is plagiarizing.
Good point. Good point. So, besides plagiarism,
yes,
what have been some of maybe the difficult experiences that you've had in this field of theater review?
As a critic, you are bound to upset some people, And there is this obligation to have integrity. You know, I have a commitment to my readers, but also to the fact that I've built this base and built this name and brand for myself as an honest critic. And so if you start really letting things slide and giving people a pass for not accomplishing their purposes at whatever the level is, you've really put your own integrity in jeopardy. And so you have to occasionally write some rough things. For me in particular, as a theater maker, a lot of the people who I'm reviewing and writing for, I've also collaborated with. They have been my coworkers, and I've supported them, and a lot of them are my friends. And so it's hard. But to get through that, you know, you have to talk to someone, get out your initial thoughts, whatever your anger is after seeing a really bad piece of theater, because it happens. If you get all that out of your system, you can go to the piece and write objectively. You can create something that they will see integrity in. And really, you have to continue to search for where's the silver lining. You can't do everything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every group does something right. Every play does something right. And so finding the balance between maintaining your own integrity and being honest, but also not being out there to just squish people down and write with your iron pen. It's challenging, but it's fulfilling.
So you've talked about all these different shows you've seen, the experience, the purpose of a piece.
Mm-hmm.
When you're if you strip all of that away, you're going to a production,
Yes.
You're not thinking about the purpose, you're not thinking about, you know, any like one of those things or the production value. You're thinking about just going in thinking what makes a good show. If you're that person, because I know from an acting perspective, from a directing perspective, from a review perspective, those are probably very different things. When you go to a show, is it the best acting makes the best production, the best script makes the best production, the best production value, like all those elements make the best show? You know, what of those things make the best show?
The script matters. The script matters. You will see a company that is inexperienced or just doesn't have a very strong vision. They can really mess with a quality script, but you cannot take the best director and the best actors and save a cruddy script. You can't do it. And so if you don't, I was reading this book and I can't remember what it was called. John Ray Young's book on directing, and he was talking about how the best money you will ever spend is your royalty money. And so invest in the good script, and everything else should be easier because you're not going to be trying to build something out of nothing. You know, the playwright's given you a story, and then you can expand. And how do you tell the story through lighting, and how do you tell the story through characters? If it's not a story worth telling, then why bother?
I love that, which tells me one of our future conversations needs to be a conversation with a playwright. We will make sure that we get one of those scheduled. We have some wonderful ones here in Southeast Wisconsin, so maybe we'll have an opportunity to tap one of them for a conversation. That's really all I have. Is there a general, parting thought on theater review that you would like to leave us with?
It's important. It's very important. It's going through a shift right now, as I've mentioned before, and I keep kind of touching and beating around the bush on the fact that newspapers are dying. They are going, and even the ones that publish actively online have, many of them, especially in this area, have cut back on specifically their arts staff. And so the job really, it's not about, is my opinion greater than the other people who are there anymore? It's about people need to know what's going on. And if we don't have access to information, if the general viewers don't have access to what arts are happening, then those arts are going to start crumbling down because we depend on audiences. We depend on ticket sales. So it's really, really important to be a critic because you can tell people, hey, there are good things happening. Look at this person, this tiny little company is doing something big. And then they get off their feet.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. So we have been having a conversation with Kimberly. This has been on the writing format / style / genre of theater review. And you can follow Kimberly's theater review blog covering theaters in Southeast Wisconsin on thestageonapage.com. And can theaters invite you? Are you booked? What's the deal there?
Yes, absolutely. So
Okay.
on my yes, absolutely. Which you asked me multiple questions. We're gonna roll with that. On my page, there's a contact me button. Contact me, and you can book. I work with companies that are really small through companies that are really large, and even groups that are just starting readings and getting off their feet. So there's no bias. Bring me in.
So thanks for having a writer's conversation with me. Hope you guys have a great day.
I let it lie. Sometimes you just gotta let it go.